Okay, wait. Let's talk this over before we start. Okay, what are we gonna say?
Welcome to The Gathering Greenhouse, a podcast to help us grow together.
Oh, you nailed it. Perfect. Let's do that.
Recording?
We're
Yeah.
running.
Welcome to The Gathering Greenhouse, a podcast to help us grow together. I'm Steve.
Well done.
And
well done.
David's
Nailed
here
it.
and John's here. And we have a few extra, well, I guess not a normal
Boy,
one and an extra
it was
person.
going so
It
well.
was.
So well.
And Matt's wearing a Tampa Bay hat right now.
Have you always been a
Yet
Tampa Bay
he's
fan?
a Yankees fan.
I thought Tampa Bay and Yankees had like a little
Well,
tiff
I think there's a
recently.
word for that, front runner.
know
I think that's
what-
what
oh,
they
yeah.
call those people.
You know,
the
do you know
wagon
what
that's
makes?
on
Yeah.
the bandwagon.
Oh, the
that's what it was.
bandwagon fan. Yeah, right.
I'm still Yankees fan.
You know what makes really bad television?
When we
Talking about something that people can't see. You know what also
I
makes really
disagree.
bad television?
there's
It's
these
people
things
who
called
have
books.
really bad voice that they're losing their voice talking on
If
the
I
podcast.
describe something, it's like, you know, if for people who are watching us on the podcast,
All right, let's
version,
describe Matt.
He has a treacherous grin.
So for those of you who don't know, Matt is one of the sound technicians for the podcast, and we're going to describe
and
him
surprisingly, his
so well.
his sound is terrible right
We're going
now.
to describe him so well that you're going to feel like you're looking right at him. So Matt is a young man.
With a scruffy looking beard.
Do you think it's scruffy?
I wouldn't call it scruffy.
I would call
A-
it's
about-
thick and slightly unkempt.
Burly.
Burly.
Is that a word?
Burly?
Is that a word?
Yeah.
I like that.
I
Sketchy.
think that's more of a description of his
in general?
his body type.
Yeah.
So he's
Yeah.
a burly fellow.
Young lad.
with a mauve colored shirt,
It's a Henley shirt.
a Henley mauve
All
colored.
three buttons are buttoned,
But his jeans are cut off.
Did those come cut off or
but they're darker.
they came cut off?
They're a very almost like a midnight navy.
Are you sure? I think that's black.
You think it's black?
Black.
It's black, right?
Okay.
It's black.
All right.
And he doesn't have very cool shoes on today. He
Which is
usually has a pretty
out
good
of character.
school game.
Yeah.
Matt's
Just very
shirt, shoes, and hat
plain
always
black
match.
tennis shoes.
They look older too.
But he's
and
wearing
not
like
very
a
clean.
gold watch that doesn't seem to.
It's not a Rolex. He's had
Doesn't
to
seem
clarify.
to match the
Not a
rest of
Rolex.
his outfit at all. Like the type of outfit he's wearing, I'd be expecting like a Casio with a
Oh yeah.
like a rubber.
Do you have a
band.
Casio, Matt? No.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. All right.
It's definitely not a Fitbit. It's way too big to be a Fit.
Is it even a smartwatch?
Is it a smartwatch?
Okay.
Did I tell you guys about the time I interviewed with a pastor who wore 2 Fitbits?
Did he have
Was
like,
it me?
It definitely wasn't.
like did he have like a challenge at the church where he had one then have a personal one?
See, I didn't know if that was an appropriate thing to ask in the interview, but it's the one thing I left, like, has never left me from that interview. I obviously didn't take the job. I don't know if those two things correlate.
Yeah, why
but
would you need 2 Fitbits?
it was
Unless-
a major red flag for me.
Well, I was just thinking some people sometimes like their work, they get like with their health care that they get sent a Fitbit
They have
that they have to
incentives on
wear
one,
and they get
yeah.
incentives. You earn money.
Were they both actual Fitbits, like the brand Fitbit?
Brand Fitbit, he had one, he had 2, and then his wife had one.
Okay, so was one cheaper than the other? Like was
I
one
don't-
of
I didn't
stripped
ask.
down
I just
version?
remember the whole time during the interview.
I couldn't tell the
I,
difference
I
either.
couldn't focus on a lot of the questions because I kept thinking,
Yes.
what is the second one for?
Maybe he was an alien.
Yeah.
And like one was monitoring the
How do you
alien
jump
and one
straight
was
to an
monitoring
alien? That makes that makes no sense at all. Let me try to bring this back around here. I have something that I would love to talk to you about this morning because I think it's a really it's a hot topic, but I'm not into hot topics that much, and
Where's-
I'm
where's
not
the food?
into the
Have
hot
you ever
topic
shopped at
store.
Hot
No,
Topic?
I'm not into that either. Matt is. That's where he gets most of his clothes. But
Wait,
I
what
am
is
not.
hot? Is Hot Topic?
It's like a teen store.
Okay.
Like
Yeah. Is it a mall store?
yeah, exactly.
Okay.
It's like that. That's where Matt gets his cutoff jeans from.
Nope.
Pre-cut off. He said yes to for everyone listening.
American
agree.
Eagle.
He said he
Okay.
exclusively shops at Hollister.
Yes. So I wanted to talk to you about, there's a state, I couldn't tell you which one. Does anybody know the state that tried to ban TikTok? I think it's like Wisconsin or something like that.
So there's been a bunch that have been in the news recently, but I
Or
don't
maybe
know.
somewhere in the South. I
I
can't
want to say
remember.
like North Dakota. I feel like a lot
Yeah,
of
it
stuff
was
happens
something
in
like
North
that. But
Dakota.
there's a state
They
that's
don't even have a cell signal there, so it doesn't matter.
yeah.
They banned all three users.
They're attempting to ban TikTok. Now, the government has banned it amongst their workers. They can't use it on like employee
On government phones.
phones. So
yeah.
they banned it that way. For different reasons, I would think, than the TikTok that's banned by the state. And then there's also been some regulations that are coming out that have actually been bipartisan regulations. So, if both parties are agreeing on something, it's a pretty important topic. But there's regulations coming out for minors about different social media platforms, whether they can have an account or not.
Montana.
Montana. Yeah, thank you. That makes sense for something like that. But so they're getting sued over it.
Also
as
a
well.
place they don't have a cell signal.
True.
Yes.
Yeah. So my question is, with all this regulation coming out, do you think this is something good? That is it a good thing for families? Is it a good thing for kids? Because I've worked in this student ministry for a long time. You have, but social media wasn't as a big thing back then as it is now. The question is it something that's good for those families?
I think it's a bad thing.
Okay, the regulation is a bad thing.
I think it's a really, really bad thing.
Yeah.
At multiple levels,
Okay.
I think it's a bad
I'm curious.
thing.
Yeah. Can you
So-
explain that?
Yeah. So let's start with, so we live in America. Mm-hmm. I'm a citizen. Are you?
As far as I know, I never
No
got my
comment.
citizenship card.
Well, so, we are citizens first and foremost of the kingdom of heaven, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then also we are citizens of the United States of America. So we
Yeah.
live by the laws here. We honor the government. We live by the Constitution. And I do think there are some things that are foundational to our country that were well done.
Mm-hmm.
And so, our Constitution gives us the freedom of speech.
Yeah.
And, that freedom has been infringed upon excessively since, probably the 1800s. But this is really starting to sound like a political podcast.
So
isn't
the
it?
problem is you're talking about freedom of speech on a podcast that's going to go on YouTube, where we run the risk of, because we talked about freedom of speech, having our. I'm just kidding. I'm just
Right. So that's a whole different tangent, though, right? Is to this question of, can YouTube,
Yeah.
throttle or ban, and is that a violation of our freedom of speech? And I'd argue that it's not. So let's go back to the original question.
Yeah. So my question is not on that, because
Right, yes.
that's a whole nother set of questions. I feel like I haven't heard where you've gone with it, but I lean towards freedoms of speech and freedoms for businesses to practice how they want to.
Well, then give me the freedom to answer the question.
Yeah. So more of dealing with like
He
families.
just keeps talking after I said that.
Well, I'm not speaking for you. I'm speaking for those who are listening.
All right. So here's what I'm going to say.
Yeah.
I don't like the government
Yeah.
banning speech of any kind.
Okay.
Okay. Now, I know some would argue, well, TikTok, it's a Chinese spy platform, and so they're actually just banning the spying stuff. Okay, fine. Then we should ban spies. That's fine. I don't think it's a great road for our government to go down to be banning anything, because here's the thing. They can ban TikTok today, but once they set that precedent, now they get to decide what kind of speech is and is not beneficial.
Yeah.
And they can ban that. And that comes back. And here's where I say we ought to be vigilant about this, because we ought to be appreciative of the fact that we can speak the gospel with freedom.
Yeah.
And the potential that we might lose that freedom is a possibility. And that's okay if that happens, right? That's fine. If the church has to go underground, that's okay. But at the same time, we ought to use our freedom as we have it. Now, at a whole nother level, I think this is really bad, because this is the government doing the parents' job.
Yeah.
And this is something that parents have slipped into is this idea that I want the government to do my job for me. I send my kids to the public schools so that they'll get their education there.
Yeah.
Right? Which is fine, but that doesn't mean it's their job to educate your kids. It's still your responsibility to make sure you're watching that and paying attention. Feel free to partner with teachers, with administrators, with schools that know what they're doing. That's great. But it's not their job. It's still your job.
Yeah.
And so I think we just have to be really careful. There's this misconception that we have, and this goes across all politics. This idea that just because something's a good thing to do doesn't mean the government should do it. Right? Do I think, teenagers should have TikTok on their phone? Nope. I don't. I think so here, I'll be really controversial.
Yeah.
Parents who let their kids have TikTok on their phone are being irresponsible.
I
Okay?
agree.
That doesn't mean the government should ban it.
Yeah.
And then now apply that to everything. Just because it's a good thing doesn't mean the government should do it.
Yeah. Okay. So are you done with that
Am I
part
done
of it?
ranting?
We are-
Well, no, because I have a follow-up question with that. I don't know if you...
I was just going to clarify. Against statewide bans, governmental bans, but you should consider banning it for yourself and for your kids.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. If my
Totally agree.
kids...
We have YouTube banned at our house because...
Good for
Yeah.
you.
Same.
Yeah, if my kids were still in the house, they would not have TikTok on their phones.
Yeah, TikTok is much easier because they don't even know that it exists. So they don't know to be looking for it. But so my follow-up question here is, so there's regulation going through the government about restricting the age that you can create accounts on social media. Then does the same stuff apply for that?
Yep. Same answer.
So then like just in my head here where it's going is it like, so there's, you have to be a certain age. I'm thinking it's 18 to like buy cigarettes too.
Yeah.
Does that apply to that as well?
Same answer.
Same answer. You should be watching your kids, but like
right.
they could be doing stuff like still with TikTok and any social media platform, they can create fake accounts. Easy, right? It's not hard to do that.
Right. Just like, a kid can stand outside 7-Eleven and ask somebody to buy cigarettes for them.
Right.
Yeah.
But I feel like it's a little bit different in that sense of like, if they've just let anybody go up to the counter and purchase cigarettes, even little kids, then is that a little bit different or it's not at all?
So here's the thing.
Because we're protecting minors because there's a whole other thing that we could get on the topic of like, what protection should we have for minors in place?
Just because something is a good thing to do doesn't mean the government should do it.
So
right?
you say you would take it all the way to there, or that's just kind of like, hey, case by
So
case.
here's where I think you have to draw the line. And I think this is very much more of a kind of a political, theoretical, philosophical argument than it is a biblical, spiritual argument. Okay. So biblically and spiritually, the parents need to be watching this stuff. It's the parents' job to bring the kids up. End of story.
Yeah.
Now, at a government level, the government's job is to protect the people. And there is a place where maybe you say it's not good it's not for the common good to have 13-year-olds getting free access to as much alcohol as they want.
Yeah.
Right? You can see how that might be bad for the public good.
Yeah.
But the moment you say, well, then we should have a drinking age of 21, the question is, then why is alcohol legal at all? Right? And I think that's where the hard thing is. So maybe prohibition was the right thing.
History says no.
History says it got repealed.
Yeah.
But the thing is anytime the government bans something, as prohibition taught us, anytime the government bans something, people find a way around it.
Right.
And so I just think you have to be careful. The whole social media thing, I don't think has been around long enough for us to really understand what the ramifications are for the common good. I think what the government should really be focused on is figuring out whether or not these big social media places, whether they're platforms or publishers. I think that's a much bigger question. Like, should they be held responsible for the content or should they not?
Oh, they don't want to be held responsible.
No, they don't, but they still want to regulate it. And I think they can't have it both ways.
Sounds very hypocritical to me. I don't know.
Yeah, let's be angry. Get off my lawn.
Yeah.
Well, there is something to be said about regulation in general, especially when it comes to minors. that directly has to do with parenting, right? So we can say, yes, ideally, parents should be incredibly involved in their kids' lives and monitoring and honestly controlling what their kids are consuming. However, our world is broken and many people don't have parents who are like that. A lot of people don't even have parents, right? And so for those kids, right, then there seems to be this pressure for us as a society to come together and say we need to still somehow protect them. And I think that's where a lot of the regulation seeks to fill that gap. But it's a trade-off. Whenever you add regulation, you lose some freedom. There is always that trade. And I think that's what makes it hard. And we can talk in ideals, but the reality is our world is incredibly messed up. Yeah. And that's where it gets a little bit harder to navigate.
Let me just take us right over the cliff.
Wait, what?
All right.
Why are we going over the cliff?
So back in the 90s, Newt Gingrich got in a lot of trouble for saying we need to bring back orphanages. But I'm not sure he was wrong. So, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I do
Instead
think
of foster care.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I wonder sometimes if we'd be better off. But John is right. I mean, it's really hard to just argue ideals in a world that's broken because you realize that the ideal way of doing things can sometimes have a really detrimental effect on those who are underprivileged. And so you have to take that into consideration. But at the same time, you can't overcorrect and create a thing where you're trying to help, but you're actually hurting. It is just very convoluted. Why are we even talking about this?
Because I think it's happening. It's taking place. It's a real world issue that parents and our society is struggling with. What direction we go? So I just thought, hey, let's just be a voice in there because, like you said, if we're not teaching our friends and family and we don't have a voice, we don't have to have all the right answers, right, but we need to have a voice in it.
I think generally speaking, we as Christians and we as the church need to quit trying to get politicians to do our job for us, right? I think that's one of our biggest problems. That's, you hear about Christian nationalism and, all that kind of stuff. One of the reasons we get accused of that, wrongfully so, is because we've been trying to legislate things that we should be just taking care of in the home. And if we just take care of them in the home, then that's going to be okay. So parents, you can ban TikTok and you should, but don't get all excited because your politicians are doing your job for you. Do your job.
Yeah. All right, so
get off my lawn.
Get off my lawn. Okay, so now I'd like to kind of shift tones here and go towards talking a little bit about your sermon on Sunday.
Right. Yes.
Which, depending on which,
super exciting and uplifting and positive.
It's going to be very uplifting and positive. But honestly, depending on which service you went to, it was definitely different from service to service in some lengthwise.
No, they were all long.
Oh, did they go even?
They all went over.
I wasn't paying attention as much in the first one.
Went long.
Okay. So how big a problem do you think fear is for Christians?
I think it's huge.
Okay.
I think so. Fear is just it's one of those things that it's a horrible motivator, but it's probably the most powerful motivator.
Yeah.
And generally fear is usually worry.
Yeah.
About pain or loss or both.
Yep.
And what we do and don't do often reflects what we are afraid of. And so anytime you find yourself doing something, saying something, thinking something, treating someone some way that is wrong is because of fear. It's because I'm afraid or I'm worried about losing something or experiencing some kind of discomfort. And I think, as we talked about in the sermon on Sunday, I think so much of what Christians are sometimes motivated is fear. And the reason we don't live up to our calling is because we're afraid.
Yeah. So do you think Christians have more fear than someone maybe who isn't a Christian? Or do you say there's just similarities there?
Yeah. So I think the human condition is fear.
Okay.
But Christians have a reason not to be, fearful. We of all people ought not be fearful. There ought to be a discernible difference between a follower of Christ and someone who doesn't follow Christ in the level of fear that we have.
And the confidence that we have in the one who's controlling it.
Right. Our willingness to lean into difficulty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Good answer there. Okay. So should Christians and all Christians in this sense expect to suffer?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely.
Okay. So explain a little bit more about what you mean by suffer in that sense.
Discomfort
Yeah.
of any kind.
So I think of suffering as, over an extended period of time. Cause you kind of have a bump in the road, but when you're suffering, it's like enduring pain, enduring a difficult situation.
Yeah. So if the world that we live in, and by world, I mean the people of the world and just, the cosmos, if the world that we live in is deeply affected by sin, and it is,
Yeah.
therefore, if the world that we live in is hostile to God and to Christ, and it is, then shouldn't those of us who are loyal to God and to Christ expect to experience some kind of tension, strife, opposition?
Yeah.
And we should. So what that leads to might look different for all people. But if I'm truly living out my faith, then I'm going to be living in opposition to the majority.
Yeah.
And that's going to be difficult.
Yeah. So
I was gonna say, not even that, right? We live with a constant discomfort because we are essentially end up kind of having two natures, right? We still have the flesh, but we have the spirit, right? And so we will never be comfortable in that tension. And so it's like you carry that with you wherever you go as a follower of Christ. And then not only that, you're around people who don't even have that tension, and that's hard.
yeah, you talked a little bit about this in your sermon, is the idea of we do live in a country, and you talked about America and Europe in it, of saying that we don't suffer for our faith very much. So when you read New Testament, because it talks about suffering quite a bit, Paul gets into it a lot. Do you think the same things that Paul's talking about apply directly to us, since we aren't really under persecution like Paul and some of the early Christians were?
Well, the question is, why aren't we under persecution?
Yeah, because you talked a little bit about that as well.
I do think that we have moved to a place in our culture that is not dissimilar from Rome. But I think the degree of our witness is far lesser than the degree of the first century Christians' witness. I think that's why we don't suffer.
Yeah.
I think if we were to really speak out into culture the truth of the gospel, that we might suffer a little bit more. Mm-hmm. I think.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, we have a tendency, I think probably every new generation has this, but we have a tendency to think that because we have all this technology and we have all this knowledge, that we are in some way better than the previous generations, or even way better than the early Romans or things. But the truth is, people are people. So, they were pretty smart back then too. Mm-hmm. They understood rhetoric and debate, and had, complex governments and complex issues going on. So, to say that we've kind of evolved past that is kind of short-sighted in my thought of to thinking that hey, we know so much more now that we're not going to deal with the same problems that they dealt with.
Right. Yeah. I think, and I think that probably the biggest difference between then and now for Christians is we are much more connected to our affluence than the early church was. And I think...
Yeah, could you explain that?
Well, this whole podcast, I'm just going to come off as the angry guy.
You're not the angry guy.
I'm the angry guy.
Let me just pound on some people a little bit more. So I know what you make.
Okay.
All right. And can we talk about that?
Sure.
I know that you make way less than most people who are your age, your level of education, your level of responsibility,
and my level of expertise.
Well, we'll go with age
and my good looks
and education and responsibility.
Yeah.
Right. And when I say way less, I'm talking maybe a quarter or a third of what people who are at your stage of life, in this area, make.
Okay.
Okay. So I could argue that you are actually suffering for the gospel.
Yeah.
Because you've chosen to, follow the calling that God has on your life. And as a result, you just are simply never going to have the level of affluence that
Maybe I'm just good at suffering because I don't have a problem with it so much.
no, you don't. But here's where I'm going with this.
Yeah.
But if you took those people who make 3 or 4 times what you make and told them, hey, for you to follow Jesus, you've got to live on what Steve is making right now. That would be suffering.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't do it. So this is where here I go again, right? I'm get off my lawn guy again. But the reality is, if we said to people, hey, you should take everything beyond what Steve is making and live on that and give the rest to the poor, that message wouldn't fly. And
Right.
people would be like, oh, I can't do that. That's suffering.
Sounds like the rich young ruler a little bit.
A lot of it.
Is that where you're going? Is that where you're going with it?
I mean, not necessarily, because I'm not saying sell all you have.
Right.
I'm
Well,
just,
was it Jesus really telling him to actually sell everything that he has?
Yeah. He's telling
so you-
him that.
Yeah. So you think he was literally saying, get rid of everything and give it to the poor? Or was he speaking to his heart? See, because I
Yes.
kind of thought it was like,
Both.
okay.
It comes
so
back
he,
to the.
he really wanted him to do that.
This is very similar to the TikTok conversation, right? If you can't, if something in your life is becoming an idol, right, and you can't practice the self-control to not have that sit in the place that God ought to sit in, then your best move is to get rid of it completely, right? Your best move is to go and sell all if your possessions are your idol, and you can't seem to get that in order, then maybe you do need to move on from that.
I would love to have Jesus and the rich young ruler together and like ask them a few questions about like just to clarify some things in that discussion, because it was so quick, but it was so powerful because he wasn't asking other, he met with plenty of rich people. And he didn't ask them to sell everything.
So Jesus was saying something.
Yeah.
He was calling him to do something that he knew he wasn't going to do.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But what he was saying to him is, you have to detach yourself from your own self-worth, your own self-preservation. You have to be willing to give up everything and rely fully on me.
Mm-hmm.
And that was what he was calling him to do. And that was too high a calling.
Right. See, I feel the biggest pressure is just looking at what other people around you have. Like I feel like it's because it doesn't matter if you make a little or you make a lot. You always are constantly comparing yourself to what other people have. So if you can get that under control, then you can really be happy in a lot of situations, no matter if you're rich or poor. If you're like, hey, you know what? Like I should be happy with what I have. I'm blessed with what I have. And if I don't have it, then God didn't necessarily want me to have it. So, having
Be
that
content
attitude
with such things as you have.
Yeah, being content in the situation and looking at the blessings. Because there's also, to me, this is a terrible way to look at it. So I don't recommend it. But there's always people who are way worse off than you. Like when it's just the reverse of looking at other people and being
If you have
jealous.
to play the comparison game,
then
though, that's the one to play.
Right. But you're looking at other people, well, at least I'm not them. You know what I mean? So it's almost equally as bad, but it makes you feel better instead of making you feel worse.
Right. If you're doing that with the suffering, that's probably okay. You don't want to do that with like righteousness.
Yeah.
That's like the Pharisee and the tax collector.
Right.
Thank you, Lord, that I'm not like him.
At least I'm not John.
This podcast is brought to you by the Gratitude Experiment
Oh, yeah, there you go.
by Pastor David Rudd.
Available on Amazon. Is that what it's called? The Gratitude Experiment?
I think so.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So
Did we answer the question?
we did. Yes.
All right.
We did. So let's talk about, because I want to stick on this a little bit longer, if that's okay. I have one other question with it because this is, you talked about unrational fears. So how can you control unrational fears?
Does it say that on your question?
It doesn't.
Unrational?
It doesn't.
Because there is no way I would have typed that word.
Unrational.
Yeah.
Irrational. What's the word?
Irrational.
Irrational. I couldn't think of it at the time I was ready.
You're
don't have-
unrational.
I don't have-
Unrational did not make sense to me, but I didn't have the other word.
Even as you said it,
Irrational.
you're like-
I was like, this doesn't sound right. I know, but irrational.
Yeah.
Not
Okay,
unrational.
I didn't hear the question. I was
you're
just lost
stuck on that
on
word.
unrational.
My bad.
You were
How can you
unrationally hooked
control irrational fear? because it's irrational, like it's not based on logic. So how do you use logic to treat something irrational? Because I feel like you have to use kind of like therapy methods to get away from irrational fear. I don't think you can say stop that or this isn't good for you. I mean, I know you can say it, but I don't know how helpful it is for someone who's very irrational.
I'm going to say, I don't think you use logic. I don't think you need therapy methods. I think you need discipline.
Okay.
I think that's what it is.
Yeah.
And discipline is not like a fun word, and it's not in high demand these days. Mm-hmm. But the reality is discipline is the answer. So when I have an irrational fear, I have to be committed that I'm not going to let that irrational fear stop me. And what that means is that when I start to sense that irrational fear, I've got to recognize the trigger point there, and I've got to have the discipline to say right then and there, this isn't rational, and I'm going to continue on. Remember, one of the things I said on Sunday was that fear stops us. Mm-hmm. It's okay to have fear. Fear it's a part of us. It's a survival mechanism. The thing is, I can't let it stop me from doing what I know I need to do.
Yeah.
And that takes discipline. So I'm not going to try to make the fear go away.
Right.
Because I know that it's there. But what I am going to do is I'm going to force myself to keep going in spite of the fear.
Yes.
I think if you talk to like the young men, maybe these were 18-year-olds who stormed the beaches in Normandy.
Yeah. That's rational fear.
Sure, but it's fear. Fear is fear, right? And what do they have to do? They had to move forward, and they did. And I think...
Yeah, but don't you think they were scared?
I know they were scared.
Yeah.
But they kept going.
Yeah.
That's discipline.
Sure.
They didn't need to, have a therapy session before they got off the boat.
Well, yeah, but what I would think what I'm getting at here is it like for someone who just feels like life is out of control, and maybe it's based on irrational thoughts, to say that like, hey, if I just am more disciplined, I will stop having these thoughts. I don't think that that's true.
I think the key is what is creating the discipline, right? So what habits are you intentionally creating in yourself to help you be disciplined? And then what are your, when that fear does come up, what are your things you're going to do to help you get over that, right? Defining those things. It's not just saying, I'm a disciplined person, therefore I can just will myself immediately every time I'm afraid to go.
Yeah.
You have to build that up so that, so those soldiers who stormed Normandy had months of training. They had somebody behind them yelling, go, go, go. There was a lot built into that. It wasn't just, hey, kids off the street, let's go storm the beaches,
Yeah, but they still, even though they went through all that, they were still afraid. Still had fear.
And so it's not that all of a sudden you won't still have fear. It's that you won't be controlled by fear or ruled by fear. Faith is not necessarily the absence of fear. It's looking fear in the face and still taking that step forward. I think that as Christians, I mean, I'm sure those Christians who were martyred, fed to lions were scared of the lion, right? But they had more faith in God than their fear in that moment.
Right. So I think one of the things you said, Steve, is really key in this conversation. That, you said they feel like their life is out of control. Mm-hmm. Well, the question is, how did you get there?
Yeah.
Right? The reason you're there is because you've let fear build on fear, build on fear. And instead of building disciplines and habits to address those fear, you've just let the fear build and build and build and build and build. So what John is saying is discipline is building habits over time. And that is absolutely right. You can't expect to confront out of control fear if you spend all your time letting the fear build and never built the discipline to address it. So if you find yourself in that spot, you're in a tough spot, but you have to start somewhere. Mm-hmm. The key is build the discipline when you can so that you don't get to that spot, right? And I think we don't value discipline enough in all areas of life. That's why we have such an anxious and stressed out world, is because we just simply don't value discipline and we don't build discipline habits.
Yeah. Okay.
Would you say we're afraid of discipline?
Yes.
Okay. So what's
the title of this podcast going to be, John?
TikTok and fear. I don't know. What else would we talk about? We'll talk about
Get off my lawn.
Get off my lawn.
You got to put Get Off My Lawn on there.
Next sermon series.
The Angry David podcast.
So what is the next sermon series going to be?
Tick Toxic.
Tick Toxic. That's a good one.
Tick Toxic. So, but what it is we're going to take James chapter 3 and we're going to just dig deeply into it. We're
Okay, so it's going to be a whole series.
A whole series on James 3.
Okay, how many messages will be?
4
in
or 5.
4 or 5. Oh, okay, wow. Okay.
So here's the thing. This is funny. John, you don't even know this because you've been on vacation.
Uh-oh.
So when we first sat down to plan the series, we planned for 4 weeks. And then I realized there's 5 weeks in July. So I haven't decided yet what we're going to do on July 2nd. I may use July 2nd.
5 Sundays, not 5 weeks.
5 Sundays.
Yes.
Yes. But we work in a church, and so
Yeah, right.
Sunday equals week.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So,
It's like I didn't realize there was 5
Unless
weeks.
Christmas falls on a Sunday, then it messes everything up.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or Christmas Eve, which
Christmas
it is
Eve,
this
that's
year.
even worse.
Yeah. So I haven't decided what we're going to do for July 2nd yet, whether we're going to intro the series that day or do something kind of special. So it's either going to be a 5-week series or a 4-week series, but it's going to all be James chapter 3, which is, I'm not going to give it away right now, but our monthly challenge for July is going to have something to do with that also.
Okay. What is our challenge right now that we're currently in?
Yes. Our challenge right now is together, we will empower kids to get outside or to get out of the house.
To get out of the house.
To get out of the house, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I would like to talk
I've
about
talked
it.
enough. So you talk about it.
Yeah, so go on a family hike, go to the playground, go to the pool. He's leaving. If you have nieces and nephews, include them. I'm just thinking of people who don't have kids.
So we're buying pool passes for kids who can't afford them.
Right, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So
I think it applies to our families too, though. Is that where you're
well, yeah, but the big challenge is to sponsor the pool passes.
Yes.
Yeah. And how can people do that?
Well, they can do it one of two ways. They can get an envelope at the church, which is hanging up on our challenge accepted wall, or they can go to the giving page if they already have it on their phone, or they can find it on our website. And then they can, instead of selecting the general fund, they can actually select a fund for the pool pass.
I think it's called the Pool Pass Project.
Pool pass project. Yep.
The PPP.
Triple P.
Yep.
All right. Is that it?
That is not it. There's one more thing. What is one side dish that you most hope to eat at the church picnic?
Ooh. Wow. I don't know what you give me your answer
Lucky
first.
Charms.
That's a cereal.
I know. Well, one year, I'm not going to say who it was, but someone actually brought Lucky Charms, and I was like,
I vaguely remember
I was
that.
like, that's interesting at first, and then you know what? The kids loved it.
Do they just eat it with their fingers?
I don't know. I wasn't watching it close enough, but it was very popular amongst the kids. Like, now you say cereal kind of falls in between side and dessert. I don't know where you'd put something like that, but we put it with the sides.
No. The commercial said cereal is a part of a well-balanced meal.
Because of all the fortified
But so is
vitamins
dessert.
No, it's
and
not.
so is
actually.
the side. So it doesn't clarify it at
It's
all.
not part of a
I think
well-balanced meal.
cereal is the dessert, side, and main course all in one bowl.
Okay.
So I'm looking forward to some Lucky Charms.
All right. I don't have a great answer here.
Kale?
Nope. Nope. I love the desserts. I guess I'm hoping there will be something that will be a really kind of nice mixture of like a dark chocolate and peanut butter,
Okay.
but has almost like a fudge-like consistency to it.
I like those ones too.
Yeah, and probably some marshmallow mixed into it. So somebody can make something like
Like
that.
what kind? Like marshmallows or like the marshmallow fluff? Or
Oh,
what
I
are you
don't-
talking?
either-
Marshmallow
either is
flavor or
great.
something? Okay.
I think sometimes marshmallow fluff is used too much when you could just use the marshmallows and it would be
What?
awesome.
I don't know about that. I
Yeah.
disagree.
You can always use marshmallows.
I don't know. They have a weird spongy, but you like the circus peanuts, so maybe you like that weird spongy. I
do.
just feel like it's not solid. It's also not a liquid. It's like somewhere in between when you eat it, and that just I don't like
Well,
it.
Steve, as a citizen of America, you have the right to be wrong,
I do. You are correct.
and you're wrong on this.
Just don't say it on YouTube.
Yeah. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. This has been a knowledge. A great podcast. Hey, this has been a interesting and fun-filled wisdom guidance podcast. So thanks for joining us. And we will be back here next Wednesday.
You won't.
I won't, but
No.
we will collectively.
I'll be here.
So
Somebody else will.
have a great day.
I'll be less angry.